what I really appreciate is the spirit of collaboration, wanting to work together, the openness of everybody to listen to each other and to talk and to realize that through dialogue, through understanding each other's perspectives, we'll ultimately get to a better position. We'll all work together for the shared objective of improving patient care. So I love the openness of the dialogue. The access to stakeholders is great as well. So it's really always energizing to come. And that's why I really enjoy coming to the UAE. It's a long flight, as you know, but there's huge value and, huge credit to the organizers for creating such an amazing event.
And the weather's better than Cardiff.
The weather is much better than Cardiff. Absolutely.
Welcome to another edition of the Health Beats podcast. I'm Steve Gardner, Managing Director of Healthcare World magazine, and I am your host. We're brought to you today in association with Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week. And in fact, we are here at Abu Dhabi Global Healthcare Week, where the conference is in full swing. The final day is going on outside. Still crazy busy out there and looking fantastic. But if you can't be here to access the great content that we've got on site, the next best thing is to subscribe to Health Beats. So get yourself onto Apple Podcasts, onto Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure you subscribe because there's some fantastic content on there. And in fact, we've got a fantastic interview here today. I have Martin Price with me, who is the Director of Market Access at J&J, one of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies for Europe, Middle East and Africa. A Cardiff native originally, but out here in Abu Dhabi with me. Martin, how are you? How have you found the show?
Yeah, it's been really great, Steve. Pleasure to be here. I think it's a great meeting. I really feel the energy whenever I come to Abu Dhabi, to the UAE. I love the focus on innovation. I love the forward-looking approach and mindset. So it gives me a huge amount of energy to be here. I'm really enjoying it.
It's interesting, actually. I did an interview, or rather, the event and the event director interviewed me in the last podcast, and we were talking about the fact that this market is so interesting from the perspective that the way in which government, the Department of Health, the major provider organizations have created an event that has a different feel to a lot of because it's providers out there, it's government, it's you can find the people you want to talk to and have meaningful conversations. Have you found that this way?
Yeah, definitely. What I really appreciate is the spirit of collaboration, wanting to work together, the openness of everybody to listen to each other and to talk and to realize that through dialogue, through understanding each other's perspectives, we'll ultimately get to a better position. We'll all work together for the shared objective of improving patient care. So I love the openness of the dialogue. The access to stakeholders is great as well. So it's really always energizing to come. And that's why I really enjoy coming to the UAE. It's a long flight, as you know, but there's huge value and, huge credit to the organizers for creating such an amazing event.
And the weather's better than Cardiff.
The weather is much better than Cardiff. Absolutely.
So tell us, for those that don't understand the way in which a global pharmaceutical player like you guys works, what is a director of market access? What is it that you do on a day-to-day basis to help get therapeutics, treatments, drugs into the hands of patients?
Yeah, so I work at a regional level for Europe, Middle East and Africa. In the past, I also worked at a country level. And I would say the emphasis on what you're doing depends a little bit where you sit in the organization. So if you're in a country, your predominant role is to negotiate with the appropriate authorities within the government, usually, to make sure that we get access and pricing for patients for new innovation. When I look at my job, it's quite broad, but I'm looking at products that are in the market, launching soon, but also the mid and long-term pipeline. So for me, my role starts with products that are going into clinical phase development, phase 2, phase 3. And what I'm doing is working with the global organization to make sure, as best we can, we design our studies that will meet the needs of payers. So having the right endpoints that payers want to see, the right treatment duration, importantly, the right comparator. So a big part of my job is all around trying to influence clinical development. Also, our job is to create and tell the value story for a product. Why is it that a government should take their finite resources, because money is limited, and invest in this new technology over all the other choices they have. So what we try and do is put everything into a story, into a robust dossier, and we provide that to our countries. We also do a lot of work around evidence generation and evidence synthesis. So real world data, health economics, to try and create this kind of 360 value package that will hopefully mean governments will put their resources behind it. And ultimately, what we really want is for patients in the region to get access to innovation that can change their lives as quickly as possible. The real challenge is that every country has a different system. So we have to do a lot of tailoring and adaptation of the evidence, the data, the story, to make sure that we're working across multiple different systems, multiple different countries. So it's fascinating.
No, sounds it. I mean, in terms of how that works with regulation,
Yeah.
are you involved? Does the regulatory process work in parallel to the work that you do, or are you involved in that as well?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So within our organization, regulatory is a separate organization, but we work very closely with them because obviously there are kind of two steps. We have to go through the regulatory process with the European Medicines Agency, for example, and then we have to go to each country to get the reimbursement. So the trial is the same, the data package is the same, and so often the requirements are the same. So regulatory are very close colleagues of ours. The relationship's going to get even stronger in the future, particularly in Europe, because we have this new HTA process called Joint Clinical Assessment. And those timelines run parallel to the regulatory timelines. So the dossier for regulatory approval and the dossier for EU, the EU's clinical JCA process will need to be born, if you like, from the same sets of data. We need to borrow more heavily from regulatory information. We need to make sure we're aligned, we're consistent. So they're separate processes, but they're very much linked within our company.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it? I think for most people in society, the process of how medications come to market is really something that was completely opaque, that became part of the public consciousness during COVID.
Yes.
When we started to understand the timelines around clinical trials, the process around clinical trials, how clinical trials then go into manufacturing, and then how drugs come into the hands of clinicians and ultimately in the hands of patients.
Yes.
It's like 4D chess, isn't it? Because actually your timelines, when you're not constricted by a global pandemic, are quite long.
Yes,
in terms of, the ability to take some new trials, the ability to get it through regulation, the ability to get the remuneration and that side of the package sorted out, and also to retool manufacturing. What is the time scale for an innovative new drug from the point at which, okay, we've got something here, we believe it works, through trials, into manufacturing, into the hands of patients?
Yeah, it varies a little bit for a number of reasons. First of all, some diseases require a longer term study than others. And it also depends upon the level of evidence that needs to be collected. Roughly, I would say it's probably somewhere in the region of 10 to 15 years on average, but that's kind of my best guess. That's not based on industry data. And let me perhaps illustrate that with a couple of examples. So if you're studying more acute conditions, maybe, say influenza, for example, and you had a treatment for influenza. Well, we know it's a short-term event, right? So you could do probably a much shorter-term study. If we look at treatments for dementia, and obviously this is a big challenge that a lot of companies are working on, the problem with dementia is it's a very slowly evolving disease. So you have to get patients early enough to make a difference, and then you have to study them for long enough to see that difference. So you can look at phase 3 studies that run over multiple years. So it's a bit of a mixed picture, but it's certainly a long period of time. The other thing is that sometimes we see accelerated development for areas of particularly higher medical needs, typically cancer, where sometimes we will go with short-term or shorter-term studies to try and get accelerated access for patients and then supplement that data as we start to get patients onto drug. So it's always that balance between how much you wait for a lot of data and certainty versus how much you try and accelerate access for patients because we know there's a higher met need there. They have very little else.
I was going to say that. How much is global need a player in terms of how you accelerate that innovation? Global and indeed local need. Where you have a health system that has a particular problem, that has a particular issue, are you able to influence the process and get drugs to market faster?
Yeah, look, I think we are a global organization and we tend to look at global health needs. But what we're always trying to do, as I said, is sort of almost balance. If there's a very high unmet medical need, how can we get this medicine as quickly as we can to patients who need it, whilst making sure we have the right evidence to ensure we know it's safe, it's effective, that we have sufficient evidence to convince payers to put their money behind the product. It's a really challenging, as you said, it's 4D chess really, and we look at each individual situation on a case-by-case basis. What we do see is quite valuable is certain countries like France have early access programs. It's called Access Precoce. And that enables us to bring medicines to patients quicker in a very controlled setting before we've gone through all of the traditional pricing and reimbursement mechanisms. And that can be quite helpful. They're very selective. They will only approve medicines that kind of meet certain criteria about unmet need. But it's quite a nice way of balancing that really difficult aspect of certainty and level of evidence versus patient unmet need.
So it also gets you the evidence quicker, doesn't it? Because you're actually putting it into practical use.
Yeah.
Are those kind of programs something that you'd like to see other countries adopt?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I think generally, particularly when I look at my region, early access to treatment is a really important consideration. There's some diseases that are a bit more chronic in nature, but there are many, and I would mention particularly oncology, hematology, where patients don't have the luxury to wait.
No, of course.
And there we really would like to see earlier access for patients. If you look at the evidence, we have some countries like Germany who have a pretty good system. You launch on day one as soon as you've got regulatory approval. And then 12 months later, you go into a full pricing negotiation. You go into a full assessment of the payer evidence. So it's been through the regulatory process, so we know it's passed all of those tests. But we grant patients immediate opportunity to get the medicine, get that achieved, and then sort out some of the details later. That's quite a nice system. So I think generally getting that early access is really important. Across Europe, there's huge, even within the European Union, there's huge variation in access, which troubles me on a personal level. So day one in Germany for most treatments. In some of the smaller countries, the average can be 3 years.
Yeah.
And you think of all the number of patients who've gone too far, they've missed the opportunity to get that medicine whilst, bureaucratic processes have played out. So
And the impact of that on the whole country. We spend a lot of time talking about health equity.
yes.
This is a really, in many ways, it's probably quite an easy way of creating health equity. How much, I guess the word is interoperability, is there between systems? So, how much when you're bringing a drug to the UAE, for example, will regulators, payers, providers say, okay, well, we've seen that in use in the US or the UK. We can take this so far down the line based on the evidence we've already seen from those countries.
Yeah, it's a good question. From a regulatory point of view, there are a number of mechanisms. So certain countries, and the UAE is one of them, will reference the FDA, for example. And there are similar arrangements that sometimes come in. Orbis is one where there is that reciprocity in certain countries to certain other agencies. In the field of market access and reimbursement, I would say it's generally more implicit than explicit. So there's no doubt that in some countries, if it's available in the likes of Germany and the US, then it does, I think, give some local systems a confidence that, okay, maybe this is the right thing to do. But there's not really a formal way of referencing that. And I actually think that's correct, because the difference is that with market access and reimbursement processes, there's a budget associated with it.
Yeah.
So value for me should stay local.
Yeah.
Regulatory approval, I think cross-country recognition, like the European Medicines Agency, makes perfect sense. But the priorities of a country can be different. The way the healthcare system is set up is different. The social value judgments and priorities are different. So it's right that that value recognition is at a local level. I think where there can be more collaboration is, as we're seeing at the moment in Europe with the joint clinical assessment, that's about a joint approach to the clinical data. So it's not making decisions on behalf of the other countries. It's about saying, let's have a common approach to at least the evidence that we have and what we think it tells us. My hope is that that will speed things up, because the theory is it means less work on a local level, less number crunching, less data analysis.
More efficiency, less money.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's see, but that's the hope.
Well, there's a piece there, isn't there, from a country-by-country basis, that actually if you're saving money on the process of getting drugs through regulatory approval, through that market access piece and negotiation, that's money that could be spent on the actual drugs themselves.
Yeah, I think there is an element of, I mean, HTA is quite a costly business, actually, if you think about it. There's a lot of analytics goes into it, a lot of highly trained people. So I think driving efficiency is a good thing.
Explain what you mean by HTA.
Yeah.
What is HTA? Health Technology Assessment.
Yeah. So health technology assessment is the process by which usually a government-affiliated organization will move beyond the regulatory questions, which is safety, efficacy, and quality, and essentially, hopefully answer the question of whether or not the new technology is value for money and offers additional clinical benefits relative to the current standard of care. So compared to what we do, how we currently treat these patients, what is the added value of the new treatment? And where does it therefore fit into the overall care pathway? Who are the right patients?
So this is what in the UK is undertaken by the National Institute for Clinical Excellence now.
Yes, they're one of the famous examples of a HTA agency. The thing we see, Steve, though, is that they all work in very different ways. So some of them are more driven by cost effectiveness concerns, and that's nice. Whereas some of the systems like Germany and France put more of the emphasis on the clinical benefits to patients. So it's the same intent, but with very different methodologies. And that's what we have to navigate. But essentially, it for me, HTA is about making sure that countries prioritize the right treatments for their patients, hopefully on the basis of the right evidence, so they make good informed decisions and ultimately don't waste money for their population.
I think there's a really interesting point here around particularly the experience of NICE in the UK, and I'm sure it's common to lots of other systems, where there is almost a public perception issue. So, sometimes in the UK we'll see outcry in the media about, money-grabbing pharma companies charging too much for treatments, and at other times we'll see NICE as the HTA getting it in the neck essentially from media and from the public in terms of, there is a groundbreaking treatment for a thing, and why are you not spending the money
Yeah.
get to it. How do you answer that dichotomy from a manufacturer's point of view?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, it's my home country. We generally struggle a little bit more with NICE than we do with countries such as Germany. And there's a kind of number of reasons behind that. First of all, as I mentioned before, one of the things we really like about a system like Germany is the predominant discussion is around the clinical evidence, and it's around the benefit that treatment brings to patients compared to what they currently do. It's exactly the right conversation to have. So the focus of the discussion is on the clinical evidence. Where problems emerge for us with NICE is they use a methodology called cost effectiveness analysis, cost per quality modeling. And that causes problems for us because it kind of forces everything into a single metric, the quality. The big challenge with that is they take the clinical data and put it into a statistical model, which then often extrapolates over many, many years beyond the trial. So imagine we've done a trial in a particular cancer. We'll maybe have 2 years of follow-up. When we go to Germany, we talk about that data. When we go to the UK, we talk about, well, what's the statistical extrapolation of that clinical trial data over 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So we end up arguing about what we don't know. And that's, I think, one of the fundamental issues with the UK system and why companies like ours struggle. Plus the fact that since 1999, when NICE was established, they've had a willingness to pay threshold of between 20 and 30,000 pounds quality. That's not changed over the entire period. So in real terms, everything has gone up except the willingness to pay of NICE.
It's the UK system whereby NICE essentially has a number, which is the amount of money the system will pay per year of quality additional life.
Exactly.
Which I don't think is something that even citizens of the UK are very aware of, but it does have a massive effect on everyday life. And I guess, again, the issue of the UK being a capitated model, as opposed to other countries where we're looking at different outcomes. I mean, I think one of the things that I talk about a lot, and my general specialism is around health systems development, around, the stuff that sits behind a healthcare system, payer, provider, etc. I spend a lot of time talking about value-based healthcare.
Yes.
And outcome-based payment models.
It's a topic that's really important to me as well. And
I was going to say, is this the answer from your perspective in terms of how we get these payment models correct? Outcome-based payment.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, value-based healthcare and outcomes-based payment models.
Slightly different.
I see them as slightly different. So maybe I'll talk about the first element. I think you're spot on. I really think value-based healthcare is a tremendous opportunity for healthcare systems because one of the big, I guess, difficulties we face is this sort of silo budgeting approach. Here's the medicines budget. Here's the budget for, palliative care. Here's the budget for outpatient services. And I think value-based healthcare talks to true integration, to focus on improving our outcomes that are mattering most to patients, to define standards that we want to achieve. And this really important bit about continuous evolution and improvement and the redesign of the care pathway. Because I firmly believe that if you just focus on the sticker price of a drug or a technology or an intervention, you're really missing the point here. We should be looking more across what are we spending to deliver what outcomes, and how can refining the care pathway help us with that? One of the biggest issues I think in healthcare is the sort of unplanned variation, the frequent flyers, as we used to call them. I used to work in the NHS, so we used to talk about frequent flyers.
It's that great stats, isn't it, that 80% of your healthcare spend is on 20% of the population.
Exactly. So I think value-based healthcare mindset is a potential huge opportunity to transform the way healthcare is delivered in the future. We're, as a company, very active in working on some pilots. It's tough, it's complicated, but I really believe it's worth pursuing.
But as you said, there is a subtle difference between value-based healthcare and outcome-based payer models. Because and I guess correct me if I'm wrong on this, that the issue becomes, if you're looking at a value-based model, you're looking across the average of a population in terms of, well, 75% of the time we'll see this effect, so therefore that's the universal payment model. You probably can't do outcome-based payment models on a therapeutic or a drug because
Yeah.
it's not going to work every time, is it?
So I think outcomes-based payment models have been around for a long time now. Actually, for my sins, I did one of the very first ones, which was Velcade, a drug for multiple myeloma in the UK. And in simpler times, we were able to have an amazing dialogue with the Department of Health and with NICE and come up with a solution, and it was great. And I thought maybe we're on the cusp here of a different way of doing things. Ultimately, not a lot changed. And I think there are barriers to more complex deals like outcomes-based payment models, such as the ability to collect data, what outcome measures you use, all of those and also willingness of the healthcare system. We often hear we don't want this level of complexity, but I think they have a place, a limited place. And I think we will continue to see them as an option, particularly, for example, in the field of cell and gene therapies.
Yeah.
Why? Because we have a situation where they may, in some circumstances, be useful. If you think about a cell therapy, typically it's a one-off infusion, and that's it. And then the benefits accrue over a long period of time. Hopefully, the patient does well and lives for a very long period of time, disease-free, remission-free, whatever the disease might be. But of course, then you've got high upfront costs with long-term benefits. The other issue is sometimes the data, we just don't know, right? Because we may have 2, 3, 4, 5 years of follow-up. But what happens later? So sometimes outcomes-based payment models, I think, might have a place to play to help share risk around uncertainty. Okay, this is what we charge. We'll measure outcomes in these patients, usually more manageable because there's fewer of them. And if patients progress, then a rebate is due.
Yeah.
And maybe if they progress after 6 months, there's a higher rebate than if they progress after 12, 18 months or whatever. So,
but that's fine. I mean, interestingly, the flip side of this from a provider point of view, I always use the example I always use is a hip replacement.
yeah.
So a hip replacement, it's a fairly simple operation. You can standardize what the cost looks like. You know what you're doing, and you know what your expected outcome is. So therefore, you've got a situation, if it's been done properly, it's been done well, and in 3 weeks' time, the patient is walking well, then there's a kind of uplift in payment. If there's a readmission and you have to refit the thing, then there's a rebate check.
Yeah.
Simple. Cell and gene therapy, same thing. It's a single infusion. It's a single application.
Yes.
Where this gets complicated is when you start to have a multi-therapeutic, multidisciplinary approach. You might be looking at, primary care involvement in terms of pre and rehab. You might be looking at, long hospital stays, multiple operations, multiple different doctors. Suddenly you're getting levels upon levels upon levels of complexity. And then you've got the argument about how we share that payment, whose responsibility is, if one link in the chain fails, does everybody lose out financially? Is that for you why it doesn't work?
I think that's certainly a big part of it, is just the complexity. And
I think we were having a conversation yesterday about this.
Yeah.
And one of the panelists, this was on how we pay for preventative care. One of the panelists was a lawyer, and he started talking about the complex legal requirement of a contract to do this. And I just sat there and went, oh, a lawyer who's advocating for complex contracts. Whoever thought that would happen?
Yeah, I know. Look, I think they have their place, but you have to ask yourself, if you want to do a complex scheme, there has to be a really good reason why you do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just adding complexity into the system. To your kind of point on the lawyer there, that it has to for me address a clear need.
Yeah.
And it has to have a purpose. Otherwise, and for a while back in maybe the mid 2000s, I think we were starting to think, oh, this is the future here. Isn't it great? The concept that you pay for outcomes. This is what we're trying to do as a pharmaceutical industry, deliver outcomes. But then when we started to experiment in it, we heard from our customers, you know what, this is really, really complex. We don't want to have to collect this data. Getting rebate systems set up is difficult. Can't we just negotiate on price, I guess, is what we heard.
That's a little bit like the provider's fee-for-service model, isn't it? Because then you end up in a situation, where you've got this set of perverse incentives. You've got a payer who wants to pay for as little as possible. You've got a provider who every time they give a medication or do a thing, they get some money. So, there's a perverse incentive to do more, give more treatment, give more drugs, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got a poor patient in the middle who's actually the one that we should be thinking about first.
Yeah. And certainly when we're launching new treatments, the way I approach it is I kind of, with my team, obviously, but I look at it and I think, okay, what are the key sort of unanswered questions or fears that the system will have about the introduction of this medicine? And then we try and think, how can we work with them? Because every single medicine I think we've ever launched has a different set of issues. So sometimes it can be, actually, we don't know how many patients we have out there. Yeah. So we really don't know how much this is going to cost us. Sometimes it's, well, you've got 2-year follow-up for a disease that plays out over 15, 20 years. Sometimes it's, we want more data for our specific population. And so I think the key, the magic to good market access is to really make sure you listen to your customers early. So we really do try and listen to patients, understand the disease, understand their journey, and really make sure that we're trying to tailor solutions that address the particular needs of that disease, that treatment, that country. And that's why one size really doesn't fit all, and why I say, do outcomes-based payment models make sense? Occasionally they do, and they'll be the solution to the issues that the providers have, or the patients have, or the clinicians have. But there are a lot of other ways to find solutions. It's all about listening.
The difference there between an outcomes-based model and a value-based model, actually is chalk and cheese from that perspective. One has occasional merit, whereas the other is value-based care, something that we can look at.
Yeah, I think so, because value-based healthcare is more of an overarching approach. It's not just about cost. It's not just about the cost of the drug. It's about the overall system cost. It's about the overall care pathway, and it's about measuring and identifying what good looks like. So I think it's a really beautiful concept, and I think there are a few good examples out there, but not enough. Just to give you perhaps an illustration from my point of view, when I look at healthcare systems, typically it varies, but typically, let's say systems spend about 15% of their budget on medicines, and then roughly, probably half of that are generic drugs. So for branded, innovative pharmaceuticals, it's roughly about 7% of overall healthcare spend. But the inordinate amount of focus that's put on assessing those drugs within a budget silo is probably disproportionate. Because for me, the question should be, how can we use these technologies to make a difference on the 85% that's not spent on drugs? So how can we use it to reduce hospital costs, to increase throughput, to treat more patients, to keep more patients at home? And I think that's what value-based healthcare is for me, is answering the bigger questions and seeing, therefore, pharmaceuticals and other medical technologies as a tool, as a means to treat patients better, give them longer lives, but also reduce variation and reduce overall system costs. Where the real opportunity is, we talk about sustainability of healthcare systems. We're not going to tackle that if we have this hyper focus on innovative drugs that are such a small proportion of the overall spend. The opportunity to drive sustainability is to think about that 85% of the pie, value-based healthcare.
No, great answer. And I think there's a couple of things that come out of that I find particularly interesting. I mean, one of them is around, the amount of time it takes to get a drug to market, the amount of time it takes to react to clinical need. I mean, from an R&D point of view, what's your event horizon? How long or when do you kind of identify what the next thing that you should be researching, creating is? So what are you looking at now, and when will that go to market?
Yeah, so I'm first of all, I'm not an expert in R&D, so I'll give you my thoughts, what I see on that. The first thing we need to do is we need to identify targets.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work, and there's an incredible amount of collaboration with external academics, hospitals, government agencies around the basic science. So it all starts with the basic science. Then it's about target identification. Is there a new target that we can hit, for example, in the treatment of multiple myeloma? Then it's about, can you synthesize a medicine that can attack that target, or can you develop an approach? So the guys in R&D are looking way into the future. If I look at what I'm involved in, it's a mix, but we're already interested in and looking at treatments that will come in the mid-2030s. So that gives you an idea of the...
So the identification of what needs to be researched, developed, and brought to market can be 20, 30 years in the future.
Yeah, it depends certainly that's the case, that because you have to start with basic science, you have to go through, a process of discovering those targets in the first place. And that's can take a long time. You can discover something, you can't discover something. So yeah, it's a very kind of involved, in-depth, intensive process. And there's a lot of kind of experimentation as well, I think, in those early phases. Sometimes things pay off, sometimes they don't. Sometimes we can develop a medicine, but it doesn't do what we think it would do. Sometimes there may be problems with toxicities or whatever. So R&D is a risky process.
I wonder, it's not your area of expertise.
No,
I'm curious about, how many times do you start to develop a drug? Wow, this could solve that problem. And then you get halfway down the track and be like, it's not going to work, we'll start again.
Yeah, I don't have the figures, but the failure rate is significant. The later you get in development, the more certain you get. But certainly
the cost that must get written off.
Yeah.
Because the work and the man hours and the lab time that's gone into those must be huge.
It is. And I think this is exactly why, as an industry, one of the important things that we seek is appropriate value recognition when we do have that medicine that makes it, and we can see it causes a step change in outcomes for patients, because we're bearing the cost of all of that experimentation and innovation, some of which pays off and some of which doesn't.
Do you think the lack of understanding of that amongst the general public is the contributing factor to that there is a bit of a general view of kind of big pharma as being the bad guys? Do you think that's because people don't understand the amount of time, wasted cost, energy, investment that has to go into the development of new therapies?
I think that's certainly part of it. Where, I think if I look at my own organization, where our sole mission is around innovation, bringing transformational innovation for patients. And so that focuses everybody in the company. And with that means that we take risks in R&D, we experiment, and sometimes things don't work out. And all of that comes at, as you said, at huge cost, where by far and away as an industry, a very R&D intensive organization, one of the highest in the world, much higher than many other industries. And that's our lifeblood, is innovation. And sometimes you just get to situations where, you know what, this one isn't going to work, and we have to unfortunately just bear that cost. But when they do come to market, that's when we need to make sure we get rapid access, we get the right recognition of that innovation, because we have to then make our money on those technologies to invest in what we're working on now in the pipeline, where we will get more successes and we will get more molecules that don't quite make it. And that's actually, I think, a business model that's served society extremely well over many, many years, because we're incentivized. Our business model is innovation. So we would have never seen the amount of new treatments if we didn't have the pharmaceutical industry. And look at cancer. We're making tremendous strides in the treatment of some cancers now. And that's because the innovation is there, because it's an attractive market for companies like ours to bring new medicines. So it focuses us to address these unmet medical needs. And really, and that's a win-win.
Does the industry still have a PR problem? Do you think people still have a negative view of the pharmaceutical sector?
I mean, I think so. I think we need to do a better job with our PR. I really hoped COVID would change that narrative.
Yeah.
And it should have, because if you look at, the vaccines were a great example. They were developed in record speed.
Yeah.
Some speed bumps along the way, but
possibly one of the greatest achievements of humanity.
I think so.
The ability to develop that vaccine at such insane speed.
Yeah.
And give hope to billions of people, save billions of lives.
And if you look at the evidence in eminent published journals, when you look at the health benefits that the vaccine delivered, they're extraordinary. I mean, there's no doubt it's a big contributory reason to why we're able to sit here today in a crowded.
Absolutely.
But actually, if you read some of the more uninformed comments about it, there's a lot out there about the negative side of the vaccines, that pharma companies only did it to make money.
Well, I have to tell you,
it's a real shame.
Tell you a story. During the sort of latter stages of COVID, as managing director of an international healthcare magazine, I was rung out of the blue on a random Tuesday afternoon by BBC Radio and asked to spend 20 minutes debating with an anti-vaxxer.
Oh, goodness.
Unfortunately, I've never heard the interview back. I believe that I was completely rational and calm and reasonable. I'm sure if I listened to it back, I probably wasn't, because it's just insane just how polarized and how completely impossible it was to convince this person of the science that I'd seen. Absolutely insane.
And, I've worked in the industry now for 30 years. And before that, I was a clinical pharmacist, right? I am so deeply proud of the work that our industry does. I'm never embarrassed to tell people I work in the pharmaceutical industry. When I was a pharmacist, I used to like the fact I could help, one patient at a time. Now in this role, I can help thousands of patients at a time. Like any big organization, you can talk about healthcare organizations or pharmaceutical industry or any other industry. There have been instances where people have not got it right. Unfortunately, I don't think the examples of where we get it right get enough attention. No. Maybe because it doesn't, I don't know why. Maybe it just doesn't it's too much of a good news story.
I love the fact that you're proud of what you do. I think we should all be proud of what we do. I'm proud of what I do, in spite of the fact my producer's been shouting at me through that glass window over the last 5 minutes. I've enjoyed the conversation far too much. Let me ask one final question.
Sure, Steve.
You have the viewpoint of what's coming down the track.
Yeah.
What medications, what therapeutics are there out there that are coming up over the next few years that you're talking about now that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, I think cell and gene therapies are incredibly exciting. The opportunity to fundamentally change the course of diseases through a completely different approach is really promising. I think advances generally in cancer, things like you're well aware we've had monoclonal antibodies for many years. Now we're looking at bispecific and trispecific antibodies. So leveraging the power of the immune system, I think, is incredibly interesting research. I think new approaches such as antibody drug conjugates. There are a lot of kind of really new and novel approaches. And I think the final thing is perhaps the intersection of different parts of medicine coming together. So drugs delivered through devices, drugs delivered through surgical intervention, and the convergence of different technologies that can perhaps deliver drugs to the part of the body where they're needed in higher concentrations with lower toxicity. So I think when I look at the innovation in the industry, I'm really encouraged and I'm excited for what's to come for patients.
Sounds fantastic. I hope you've got a treatment for the black eye I'm going to get for the producer from going so far over time. But it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for being on Health Beats.
Thanks, Steve.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
And that's another edition of Health Beats. Another fantastic conversation. There's lots more of this available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, across the spectrum of where you get podcasts. Make sure you subscribe. If you haven't, what is wrong with you? Maybe we need a therapeutic for people who haven't subscribed to Health Beats. Let's make sure they do. Thanks. We'll see you again next time. Cheers.